This video is looking at adaptation, natural selection, and evolution. First, we're going to look at adaptations. Adaptations allow an organism to better survive its environment in its lifetime. So, an adaptation is something that is happening in the present. So, for example, this bird has feathers that keep it warm during colder times of the year, or it can fluff its feathers up to cool off. The feathers are also used to fly. Those are all adaptations that allow the bird here to survive its environment. It can fly and capture insects or eat berries, depending on the type of bird that it is. So adaptations don't change. An adaptation is something an organism actually has in the moment that allows it to better survive its environment. Natural selection allows for traits that best allow an organism to survive to be passed on to future generations. So natural selection is ultimately results in differential survival and reproduction, meaning that, for example, in this picture, we see an elephant. An elephant did not always have a long trunk. At some point, there was a common ancestor that possibly had a longer trunk than or longer nose than other organisms, and maybe it used that nose to root around in the dirt or to help it grasp food off of a tree. Over time, those so that individual, because it had a longer nose, would be better able to survive that environment. Because it's better able to survive, it's more likely to have offspring that survive, and so the gene for having a slightly longer nose gets passed on to future generations. Over time, if that's a selective advantage, then organisms that have longer noses over time are going to be the ones that go on to survive and reproduce. And so we see an increasing length of the nose until we end up with the current configuration of a trunk on an elephant, where it has a very long nose that actually has a lot of sensory receptors. It allows it to reach high up into trees and reach branches and foods that other animals cannot reach, and that it itself would not otherwise be able to take from the environment. So that trunk is a key piece to elephant survival and allows those elephants to go on and pass the gene for long trunks on to future generations. There's probably are still some, I'm sure, undoubtedly, there are some that are born with slightly shorter noses than others. And if there's no advantage to that, then those individuals might be less likely to survive and go on to then reproduce. So that gene for shorter noses does not get passed on unless the environment changes and there becomes a benefit. All right, sorry about that. My phone rang while we were talking about natural selection, but I think we got through our examples of the elephants. So now we are going to look at evolution. So evolution is actually the genetic change that results as from natural selection over time. So I was talking about the genes for a longer nose on elephants being passed on from generation to generation. Eventually there'll be so much genetic change that the individuals with the genes for long trunks, that will be the only thing that's in the population, is that longer gene, unless an environmental pressure pushes it back in the opposite direction. So here's another example on this screen. Let me move my little icon. So on this screen, you're seeing several peppered moths, and this is another classic biology example. In this case, peppered moths used to be primarily white, and a few of them were kind of darker colored. They were found in England, and over time, the individuals who were white had a selective advantage because they were more difficult to see against tree bark than the dark colored ones. So the dark colored variation was very rare. Most moths carried the genes for um, primarily white with a little bit of black peppered in there, thus the name the peppered moth. Over time, during the industrialization of England, soot produced from factories coated the trees in a blanket, more or less, of black, thick soot, similar to what you might have like from burning a candle or the black that forms on burning anything. So just a film of carbon all over everything. And what that did, it meant that the individuals who were mostly white, so the ones who had white with a little bit of black, now they stood out like a sore thumb against the dark colored trees. And so individuals with genes for being primarily black were the ones that were going on to survive and reproduce. And so over time, the population drifted in the direction of most of the individuals being black and fewer being white. Now it's expected that now that that industrial soot is no longer quite the problem that it used to be in England, that the population will kind of shift back in that direction, and that is in fact what has been being seen, is that there's sort of mix of individuals who are darker and lighter. And one would expect if the environment becomes cleaner, that the genes for being white with black would once again become the thing that helps the individuals to survive and reproduce. And so that particular gene would become more common in the population. So that is adaptation, natural selection, and evolution.